it started on May 1st, 1971, Amtrak inherited various old equipment from other railroads. The equipment could have been as new as from the 1960s or as old as the 1930s. This applied to both passenger cars and locomotives. The locomotives in particular were troublesome as Amtrak inherited various old streamlined diesel locomotives in different conditions. Starting with nothing but hand-me-downs of old and grimy locomotives, Amtrak looked for new locomotives to replace their, in some cases, 40-year-old engines. However, Amtrak could have had better luck with the first 3 new classes of engines that were pressed into service. These included the Electromotive Division-built SDP-40F, the General Electric E60, and the General Electric P30CH. All 3 of these locomotives flopped in the jobs that they were built for. While some did last into the 2000s, all 3 classes of locomotives were out of service by 2003, the last survivor being the E60. So what happened? Why were the first 3 newly built locomotives for Amtrak all busts? Why did they all suck? These boxy, lumbering hunks of metal were the first locomotives ordered by Amtrak in November 1972. Built by the Electromotive Division of General Motors in LaGrange, Illinois, and based on the successful FP45 built for passenger service and the SD40-2 for freight service, these engines' initial assignments were on long-distance trains in the western U.S. to replace the F and E units built between the 1940s and the 1960s. But they later saw some action hauling intercity trains and other long-distance routes across the system. But the main crux of these engines were the derailments. Engine crews often complained that the SDP-40Fs rode roughly compared to the older F and E units that they were used to. The Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, looked into the locomotive's issues in various investigations. They concluded that the root cause was the engine's 3,500-gallon water tank and the lightweight passenger cars. Most passenger equipment Amtrak inherited used steam heating for heat and electricity. To power steam heating, you need a water tank to heat water, turn it into steam, and a turbine spins to produce electricity for the cars. Easy for a steam locomotive, as they need water in order to run in the first place. But diesels had to have a section of their body dedicated to a water tank that otherwise wouldn't be there. In the SDP-40F's case, the lateral motion of the engine swaying left and right while moving down the tracks caused the water to slosh around inside the tank and caused the lightweight baggage cars directly behind the engines to come off the rails far too often. That's not to say, though, that it was entirely the locomotive's fault. Further analysis from Amtrak and the FRA concluded that the rough track condition was also a significant contributing factor coupled with the aforementioned lightweight baggage cars. The derailments became such a big problem that the Burlington Northern and the Chesapeake and Ohio railroads banned the SDP-40F from running on their tracks, as they called them rail breakers. Amtrak tried as much as they could to fix the engine's flaws by lowering their speed on routes and emptying some of the water tanks. But it was too little, too late for these engines. Starting in 1977, Amtrak began to retire the locomotives.
I don't like this thing! And here's what I'm doing with it!
Some were traded back to EMD for components to be rebuilt into the new F40PHs, and some were sent for scrap. By 1987, all SDP-40Fs were retired or sold by Amtrak, with only one surviving, Amtrak number 644, now at the Nevada State Railroad Museum in Boulder City. Amtrak ordered the second class of new locomotives and the first new electric engines in 1973 called the E60. The E60 locomotives were based on the E60C freight locomotive that operated initially at the Black Mesa and Lake Powell Railroad in Arizona, hauling coal from the mine to the Navajo Generation Station. The units built for Amtrak were modified to be streamlined, faster, and were equipped with either steam generators or electric head-end power for the new Amfleet passenger cars Amtrak ordered. The basis for these engines was the E60C because no North American manufacturer offered a passenger version of an electric locomotive. Importing and developing a new engine of a European design would take at least 3 years. General Electric promised a passenger variant of the E60C to be delivered within a year, and Amtrak took the offer. These new electric locomotives were built to replace the aging former Pennsylvania Railroad GG1s that started service in the late 1930s and the unreliable Bud Metroliners that were built as recently as the mid-1960s. Starting their service life in November 1974, issues arose with the locomotives almost immediately, particularly with their tendency to rock and roll during acceleration, which placed significant stress on the rails. Following a derailment in Elkton, Maryland on February 24, 1975, the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, conducted an investigation that uncovered defects in the truck design of the locomotives. In response, the Federal Railroad Administration imposed a restriction lowering the maximum operational speed of the E60 locomotives to 85 miles per hour. Although Amtrak publicly accepted the locomotives and stated its confidence in their ability to operate at 110 miles per hour eventually, they simultaneously pursued a trial of the Swedish-built 4-axle RC4 electric locomotive as a potential alternative to the pathetic E60, since Amtrak was not confident that they could immediately fix the issues of the locomotives. After trialing the Swedish RC4, Amtrak ordered the new EMD-built AEM7s, also known as toasters. The toasters' success finally replaced the GG1s and Bud Metroliners, displacing the E60s from regular high-speed service. However, the E60s did manage to find a second life later on. Between 1986 and 1988, Amtrak undertook a significant rebuilding, reclassification, and renumbering of its E60 locomotives. During this process, all E60s that had steam generators were replaced with head-end power. The rebuilding included regearing the locomotives to enable a maximum speed of 90 miles per hour. Upon their service return, the E60s did well, as they were utilized for the electrified segments of the heavy, long-distance passenger trains originating from the Northeast to the end of the electrified trackage. While the locomotives did improve in their performance, the engines were still more suitable for freight work than high-speed service, as they were often used on maintenance trains from time to time. All Amtrak E60 locomotives were retired in 2003, replaced by the Bombardier and Alstom HHP-8, with E60 number 603 preserved at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg, and number 958, having been sold by Amtrak to New Jersey Transit, preserved at the United Railroad Historical Society of New Jersey, still painted in its Jersey Transit colors. The P-30CH locomotives, often referred to as the Pooch by rail enthusiasts and industry insiders, were manufactured by General Electric in 1975. These engines were designed as a supplementary solution to the SDP-40Fs, originally intended for long-distance routes and shorter intercity services primarily in the Midwest. At the core of the P-30CH was the U-30C model, which had established itself as a reliable freight diesel in General Electric's lineup. Despite their promising design, the P-30CH locomotives faced a host of operational challenges that undermined their effectiveness in Amtrak's fleet. One of the primary issues stemmed from their weight, which, combined with various mechanical shortcomings, introduced significant maintenance complexities. Amtrak, especially in their early years, struggled with upkeep, often delaying necessary maintenance checks, which exacerbated their reliability problems. As a consequence, these locomotives quickly developed a reputation for being difficult to manage. In addition to their operational challenges, the P-30CH locomotives were notorious for being excessively noisy and unclean. Their lack of soundproofing within the engine cab meant that crew members were subjected to a constant barrage of engine noise. Much like the E60s, when they attempted to operate at faster speeds, the extreme weight of the engines put undue stress on the tracks, sometimes resulting in cracking due to excessive strain. Nonetheless, the P-30CH did manage to serve effectively on certain routes, particularly on the slower, heavier long-distance trains such as the auto train that ran between Lurton, Virginia and Sanford, Florida. And much like the SDP-40F and the E-60, their freight design made them more suitable for slower and heavier trains. Consequently, Amtrak decided to phase out the P-30CH fleet by the early 1990s after a little over 15 years of service. All units were retired and scrapped after 1992. It would be an understatement to say that Amtrak had terrible luck with its new locomotives. But why did all these engines fail at what they were built for? To answer that question, we need to break down 3 essential details that all 3 of these engines have in common. The SDP-40F, E-60, and P-30CH were all based on freight designs. The SDP-40F in particular was designed to be converted into a freight locomotive if Amtrak was disbanded quickly, which was a very pervasive mindset at the time. Due to all 3 being designed to either be a freight locomotive if Amtrak dissolved or built using blueprints from famous freight diesel locomotives, the performance of all 3 engines suffered. The SDP-40F was not designed to have a sloshing water tank inside the frame. The E-60 was absolutely not designed to operate at 110 miles per hour, given how heavy and bulky the bricks were. And the P-30CH was plagued with mechanical issues, and a loud and dirty motor made the locomotives uncomfortable to operate. However, there is one consistent underlying problem that all of these engines had. Take a guess based on the pictures. Notice anything? It's the truck design. The 6-axle trucks of all 3 engines did not like the higher speeds. More speed equals more vibrations. More vibrations equal more swaying. More swaying equals possible derailments. 6-axle trucks for diesel and electric locomotives are not designed to handle higher speeds. After the failure of all 3 locomotives, Amtrak's next engine, the EMD-built F40PH, had a 4-axle truck design that handled higher speeds much better. While the F40 was adapted from the GP40 freight locomotive, there was a passenger variant known as the GP40P that was produced for other railroads like Southern Pacific and Jersey Central for passenger operations. So when EMD was building the F40PHs, modifying the locomotives from a freight design to a passenger one was a lot simpler than any of the other misfits. To explore this further, 4-axle units excel in high-speed service because they can quickly achieve track speed. They can accelerate better. The maintenance of 4-traction motors is generally more economical than the maintenance required for 6-traction motors, just because there is less to maintain. The problem with 6-axle power is that the presence of more traction motors translates to higher maintenance demands. Amtrak, who was already stuck with hand-me-downs of other railroads and saddled with highly unprofitable trains, could not afford the increased maintenance. They needed an engine that could run without heavy upkeep to keep their trains moving. And the F40PH was their answer for their diesel locomotives, and the AEM-7 was their answer for the Northeast Corridor. And locomotives with 6 axles tend to exert more weight on the track. In the 1971 setting for American railroads, the increased weight of these locomotives would damage the tracks at higher speeds, which was the downfall of the SDP-40F. And at a time when the last thing the industry needed was more costly track maintenance, all 3 locomotives would exhibit more weight on the rails. While some of the design kinks were worked out for all 3 locomotives, it was sometimes too little too late. The SDP-40F only found success after Amtrak traded many of them to the Santa Fe Railway, being converted for freight service. The E-60s had to undergo a massive overhaul to make them more successful, as they lasted into the 21st century. And the P-30CHs were able to find moderate success on the auto train, pulling a mix of auto rack and passenger cars on an excessively long train, as their original freight design was more ideal for the service. For all 3 locomotives, they were unfortunately failures, which is why only so few are preserved today. All 3 locomotives were a flop. Amtrak continues to face challenges with certain aspects of its operations, particularly with the Charger series of locomotives produced by Siemens. However, it is worth reflecting on the early days of Amtrak when the situation was even more problematic. By comparing the current situation to that of the early era, one can truly appreciate the progress made over the years and recognize that while there are still many hurdles to overcome, things are not nearly as dire as they once were.